dwell in a house among his people. But now he has a home that's better than the first. It doesn't look like a building with a steeple. Now he's living in the people of the church. Brick after brick, God is building his temple. Brick after brick, he's making it strong. With Christ the sure foundation and his people as the stones, he is building a place he can live. Brick after brick.
We're going to talk about a well-known time in the life of Moses. Hopefully we'll learn a couple of important lessons about what happened to him as it plays a role in our lives as well. We're calling this Honor Me as Holy, taking our lesson from Numbers 20:12, using NIV today. In the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin, and they stayed at Kadesh. Of course, now we're talking about kind of the end of the desert wanderings. There Miriam died and was buried. Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, "If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into this wilderness that we and our livestock should die here?" As usual, they're unhappy. If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord, we'd be better off dead than where we are now. After all they've been through, they still don't get it. Why did you bring the Lord's community into this wilderness that we and our livestock should? No one's knocked themselves out for them more than Moses and Aaron. And who are they complaining about? Where's all their grief going? Moses and Aaron. Kind of understand why these guys have kind of had it by now. What more could we possibly have to do for these people? And all we get is complaints. And this isn't just idle grumbling. If you look a little more deeply into the language that's used here, this is almost like what you would do in a formal accusation. It's almost like a courtroom kind of thing. This wasn't a justified contention brought against, say, a false prophet. They didn't have a case here. They didn't have a reason to complain. Everything that's happened to them up to then is their own fault. This was just an angry mob. They didn't like it, and they were going to take it out on somebody. John Gill, the Bible commentator, says, well, they might well call them brethren. Like when they said, oh, our brothers died in the desert. They might well call them brethren, not only because they're being the same nation and merely related to them, but because they're of the same temper and disposition, and indeed, brethren in iniquity, brethren in sin, just as bad as them. Yeah, well, you might as well be like them. It's just, a repeat of the same thing. On and on and on, complain, complain, complain. And again, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? Like Egypt was such a bed of roses, right? It has no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates. And there's no water to drink. Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting and fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Now, this is a critical part of this. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink. Pretty simple so far. Here's what I want you to do. No, nothing complicated. Everything will be fine. Now, I want to bring up something that comes into play here. This is something you may have heard about, or someone may one day ask you about, or you may hear about, called Miriam's Well. This is a long-standing tradition in the Jewish community where they're saying the water would come from. And they speak about it as possibly coming in a couple of different forms. Sort of a porous rock with openings where the water could just kind of bubble out. It's even been described by some of the, as the rabbis are debating this over the years and everything, as a rock that actually followed them along through the desert, and then the water would come out of that. Where a lot of this comes from is, if you look at verses 1 and 2, it says, there Miriam died and was buried. Now there was no water for the community. Well, you look at that and you say, well, so what? What has one got to do with the other? There's two things being said there, but why are they connected? But in the Bible, very often when you put two things right next to each other like that, it actually is intended to cause a relationship. So a legend came out of that. Here's an example of that with Rabbi Naphtali Reich on Torah.org on the Jewish legend of Miriam's well. It says, like water, Miriam adapted to the oppression and the suffering and remained strong in her faith. Therefore, in her merit, God provided the Jewish people with miraculous water in the desert. And when she died, a new demonstration of supreme faith was required. God wanted Moses to draw water from the rock by speaking alone. Now, I want you to be aware of that, but I got to tell you, for me, that's quite a stretch. I don't think that's a strong enough argument to be able to tie all this into Miriam. But I thought it would be a good idea from a cultural point of view for you to be aware of that's how the rabbis saw that over the years. And so the Jewish perspective, it's interesting sometimes if you read some of their works, they'll take what seems to be a small thing and there'll be volumes written about it and they will just go on and they will do a whole scenario of what would have happened and everything. I'm like, awful lot of speculation for my taste, I have to say. And I think this is an example of that. I think they're stretching it too far, but I wanted you to hear about that. Okay, so continue on here. This is going to be verses 9 through 13. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock. And Moses said to them, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." These were the waters of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with the Lord, and where he was proved holy among them. Which brings us to our key verse. Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites. What is he talking about here? You wanted to do this your own way, apparently, because you didn't do what I told you. Who's in charge here? You don't trust me for this to work out? You had one job. All you had to do was walk up to that rock, and so who knows what I don't even know if the Lord would care. Maybe what he would exactly say. It doesn't say that he told him what to say, but maybe he could just walk up to it and say water or whatever, and it would come out. But the point is, however, there was no way they were going to get out of this one. This is wait till you see how big a deal this is. Because on the surface, it almost sounds like a small thing. But as we go, it gets more interesting. There's a couple more versions of this. The NLT says, "Demonstrate my holiness to the people of Israel." The ESV says, "Uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel." The Net says, "Show me as holy before the Israelites." And finally, the Old King James says, "Sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel." A leader's example is critical to his credibility. Moses just didn't fall short here. He did as much harm as he did good. God said to do this, I did that, and I get away with it. Well, no, not exactly. So, wielding the staff. The staff has a history. Way back, when God was demonstrating his power to Moses, he turned the staff into a serpent and then back again. It was used in the Egyptian plagues, turning the water red, that kind of a thing. Victory over the Amalekites when they said, take the staff and they'll hold your arms up, you'll win the battle. They realized that was how they were going to get victory. So the staff kind of played a role somehow. It was sort of a tool, an accessory in some important situations here. Just 40 years earlier now. Let's look at the difference. The Lord answered Moses. Again, Moses had gone to the Lord about the people, and he said, go out in front of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I'll stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. I'll be there with you. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. Again, simple instructions. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders in Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Massah and Meribah means testing and contending. This is a problem on a lot of levels. God is not one you test and contend and argue with. Psalm 95 talks about this. It says, today if you would only hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day at Massa in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested me. They tried me, though they had seen what I did. They knew who I was. They knew what I could do. They'd seen my power on more than one occasion. And yet, they're still trying to see if they can get over on me. So, it was a very similar situation. It's interesting how this kind of occurs at the beginning and at the end of the Exodus. So what was different this time? A couple of critical things. Speak to that rock before their eyes and it'll pour out water. Last time he said, hit the rock. And he hit the rock and everything was fine. This time he said, speak to the rock. And he hit the rock. Look at the attitude here. Moses talking to the people says, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? Well, do you see a critical mistake in that line? Must we? We who? Who does Moses think is doing this? He's not doing it. Way too big for his britches. Way too cocky, way too arrogant. You're not bringing anything out of that rock. The water that comes out of the rock, that's done by God. And obviously, he's kind of mad here, isn't he? So he's letting his emotions get a hold of him. Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. This is another important point we're going to get to as well in a second. The first question that comes to my mind is, what was Moses thinking? Dude, what's wrong with you? You know better than this. You should know better than anybody not to do anything except exactly what God said to do. Why would you do that? By the way, if you look at this picture, I want to do a little illustration here. You see this commonly in religious art. In religious art, there's a lot of symbolism, there's a lot of meaning, and sometimes there's hidden meaning. You have to look a little more closely. See the way he's holding, this kind of gentle, like a magic wand. Poof, ooh, water, right? That might not be accidental. It might be the artist's way of saying, look, there's no power coming out of Moses. He's just got to be there like a lightning rod, and God's going to do it. I could be reading too much in that, but that's what I kind of draw out of this. And I wonder if that's what they were trying to say. Because you never see Moses, like this, right? When it's pictured, it's always kind of like this. Here's another question for you. Why did he hit it twice? Remember 40 years back, he hit it once. Doesn't say anything about hitting it twice. He hit it, and the water came out. This time he said, speak to it. He hit it. And here's what I think. I think nothing happened, which is why he hit it the second time. This was not just a simple walk up to it and go, okay, let's get this over with. No, not at all. This was, you want water? I'll give you water. How about that? That's what was going on here. You want water? Come on. It was almost like a weapon. That's the situation here. Was there a missed opportunity here? After the first strike, was there a little gap when the Lord said, sure you want to do this? Almost had another chance to go, oh, what was I thinking? I'm sorry, let me start again, And did Moses double down? That's why he hit it a second time? A little speculation here, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think he might have had a chance to make it right and didn't take advantage of it. Don't we do that often in our lives? We have a chance to dodge a bullet, and we go, we do it anyway. And then later on, we're like, oh, man, what was I thinking? Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy. If Moses couldn't get this right, how was he going to be able to do anything else? How is he going to be able to lead the people? How is he going to be able to show them the importance of honoring God as holy if he can't do it himself? They're looking to him. This is the guy that's praised in Hebrews. It says, by faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible, not because he trusted God, because he honored God as holy. So what happened here? Moses acted selfishly. He let his emotions get to him. He was tired. He was worn out. He'd had enough. His faith and trust in God faded. I say sometimes our faith can be kind of like the tide. It might ebb and flow a little bit. It's a natural occurrence. It's kind of who we are. This was a weak moment for Moses, and he made a huge mistake. He failed in his leadership role. Everyone had been looking to him. It's a lot of pressure for a long time, for many years. We look at that, we go, I hate to think how I would have managed after all that, listening to those people all that time and putting up with all of this. So you can see how human weakness can creep in. And Aaron, by the way, was compliant and shared the responsibility. I believe there was a missed opportunity for him, too. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, as it said earlier. I'm talking to both of you. Aaron, I think, it might have had to be quick, but maybe he could have gone, no, don't do that. What's the matter with you? As Moses was, going, no, stop. You know better than that, pal. But he didn't. He was just there, apparently. So they both ended up paying for that. What we have to understand is God's holiness is his most defining characteristic. If you know nothing else about God, you need to know that he is holy, absolutely holy. Everything else comes out of that. If you don't get this, you have no chance of getting it at all. How are we ever going to get anywhere in the Christian life if you don't realize the importance of God's holiness? Some examples. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne. This is from Isaiah. And the train of his robe filled the temple. That is an example, by the way, of if you're a king, the bigger a big shot you are, the longer the train of your robe is. And so this is an image to show you just how holy God is. His robe alone would fill the temple. Above him was seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying, and they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. This is the point. God is absolutely holy. How many times, by the way, do we make a point of calling to one another in the church, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty? How often do we make a point of that to each other, to remind each other of that? Just how holy God is, how important that is, how essential that is to our faith. Don't ever take God for granted. I get that visual thing, you can see it, you can hear it, the doorposts and the thresholds shaking, the temple filled with smoke. Ba-boom! Do I have your attention now, huh? That's what it makes me think of. Among those who approach me, I will be proved holy. In the sight of all the people, I will be honored. Leviticus 10:3. This has to do with Aaron's sons making a huge mistake with the sacrifice, paid for it with their lives. Aaron had nothing to say. He understood. This is not a request. This is not even an order. He's not telling you what to do. He's saying, among those who approach me, I will be proved holy. What he's saying here is, this is a warning. Don't mess with God. Take him seriously. He is absolutely holy, and he will be proved holy one way or another. It's just the easy way or the hard way kind of thing. We're the ones that decide whether it's the easy way or the hard way. We do it to ourselves. But he says, one way or another, you're going to see who I am. You're going to know who I am. Dr. Richard Lynch said this, God's presence was a great comfort to Israel, while at the same time being a great threat to their unholy lives. One did not lightly or superficially come before God. Couldn't have said that better myself. Exodus 4, look at this. At a lodging place on the way to Egypt, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But his wife Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off his son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. She saw what was coming. She realized, we didn't do this. I better do it right now. Why? Because she took God seriously. She knew what was likely to happen, I'm assuming. Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me, she said, so the Lord let him alone. Close one, Moses. You owe that to her. At the time, she said bridegroom of blood, referring to that circumcision. Another example of God's holiness in 2 Samuel, when they were transporting the ark on a cart. When they came to the threshing floor of Nechan, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. The ark's going to fall. Let me get it. What happened? The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore, God struck him down and he died there beside the ark of God. But Uzzah was just trying to help. Not the point. God said, you don't touch the ark. The priest didn't touch the ark. They'd go with these poles on the ring and they'd carry it. They didn't just pick it up and carry it. You didn't touch the ark, period. Because of God's absolute holiness. What should he have done? Trusted God enough to maintain his own holiness, to either keep it from falling or whatever else was going to happen, but don't try to step in and take over. It's not your job. All we told you to do is leave the ark alone. Stay out of the way. Again, you decide to step in it. Well, stepping in it brings consequences. Moving on to the New Testament. Ananias and Sapphira, you're probably familiar with the story, but if you're not, having to do with the believers pooling resources to take care of each other. And their problem was lying about what they were contributing. Peter said to her, Sapphira, how could you conspire to test the Spirit of the Lord? Listen, the feet of the men who buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out also. He had just paid with his life for lying. She shows up, backs up her husband's story, and she pays with her life. At that moment, she fell down at his feet and died. Then the young men came in, and finding her dead, carried her out and buried her beside her husband. Great fear seized the whole church and all who heard about these events. Because what they found out is you don't lie to God and get away with it. You don't test God and get away with it. When Jesus was being tested by Satan in the desert, he said to Satan, this is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. He says that in Matthew. He's referring to Deuteronomy 6, which, by the way, is talking about the Old Testament issue with the rock in the water. So, what happened to Moses? Promised land, all those years that he worked and put up with everything, suddenly, he's not even going to get to see it. God says, oh no, you won't be going there. This is what I've been after all these years, these struggles, all this suffering, and I don't get to go. Told you, don't mess with me. Don't test me. Listen to this. On that same day, the Lord told Moses, go up into the Abraham range to Mount Nebo in Moab, across from Jericho, and view Canaan, the land I am giving the Israelites, not you, as their own possession. There on the mountain that you have climbed, you will die and be gathered to your people, just as your brother Aaron died on Mount Hor and was gathered to his people. Why? This is because both of you broke faith with me in the presence of the Israelites. I want to stop here for 1 second. When we read the Ten Commandments, we talk about not using God's name in vain. We usually think of cursing, swearing, using God's name in anger. But in fact, I believe a better representation, a better understanding of that is misrepresenting God. Moses is supposed to be, he's the one who spoke God face to face, right? They said, I spoke to him as a friend. He's the one we look to. We want to know what God wants from us. Instead of being what God wanted him to be, trained him to be, and had been using him to be, he just decided to do things his own way. He misrepresented God, and I believe that's a commandment violation to say, yeah, you took God's name in vain. You were representing God, supposedly, but you weren't doing what God wanted you to do. You weren't being the person God wanted you to be. All right, continuing on. And because you did not uphold my holiness among the Israelites, there it is again. Don't think I'm letting this go. I'm not. Therefore, you will see the land only from a distance. You will not enter the land I am giving to the people of Israel. Believe it or not, this is a little bit of mercy on God's part. At least you'd get to see it. He could have just, taken them out on the spot and said, well, you're not going to have anything to do with it. And in a way, I'm sure this filled him with great sadness to be able to get up there. And there's probably very mixed emotions. Get up there and go, wow, there it is. We made it. All they got to do is cross over and we're done. I sure wish I could get there too. At least we're here. At least I got to see it. So I think that was a little consolation for Moses. That's Deuteronomy 32. See, Moses faced consequences, but here's a great part for us. He was able to repent, recommit, and be used successfully by God. Well, so can we. When we misrepresent God, when we don't do what we're supposed to be doing, when we're not the kind of people he wants us to be. But there is room for repentance. There is room to start again because God's mercies are new every day. We can try again and just get up, swing your legs over the side of the bed, and try again. In Luke 9, we see this. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, And his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Two men who, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor talking with Jesus, the transfiguration. So, sure, Moses messed up big time, but he did go on to repent, recommit, reconnect with God, and do some more great things. And look where he ended up. Apparently, it turned out okay, ultimately. It's going to turn out okay for us, too. We just need to not give up. See, Jesus proved how important God's holiness is by what he was willing to do to solve our lack of holiness. What could be more important than that? Here in 1 Corinthians, we see this. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food, drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered in the wilderness, right? An entire generation died because they didn't take God's holiness seriously. These things, these judgments, I'm skipping down a little bit to verses 11 through 13. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us and us today, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. We're all in the same boat here. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he also provides a way out so that you can endure it. He's never going to leave you dangling. Because of the wording, I like this a little better, so I use the New Living. This is at the beginning of when Jesus what we call the Lord's Prayer. Basically, he was just teaching us the things to pray for, the method, the attitude to have when you pray, the way to do it. And Jesus said, this is how you should pray. Father, may your name be kept holy. Father, may your name be kept holy, because it's the whole point, the holiness of God. And by the way, when you pray for this, don't miss out on the opportunity to be part of the answer to that prayer. We want God's name to be kept holy in the world. We want him to be recognized for who he is and what he's done and what he continues to do. So we want to be part of that. We want to exemplify that in the world. We want to show God's name as holy every opportunity we have. So what we need to do every day is to remember, do the right thing and do it in the right way. Sometimes our intentions might be good and we might be basically doing the right thing, but we're not careful enough and we make a mess. So be a little judicious, but do the right thing and make sure you're doing it the right way, at the right time. Sometimes there's something that needs to be done, something that needs to be said, and someone just can't take it at that moment. And you're like, shortly the time will be right, maybe not right now. Even though it might make me feel better to do it right now, is it best for them? And most of all, do the right thing for the right reason. Not because people are going to be all impressed with how holy you are, or it'll somehow get attention, or you'll get some benefit out of it. You do it because you want to serve God by the service of others. See, how we react to situations and people in our lives affects our ability to honor God as holy. Let's not set ourselves up to fail. As Hebrews 12 says, make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. And the good news, found here in 2 Peter 1, 3 through 7. His divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Through these he has given us his very great and precious promises so that through them you may participate in the divine nature, having escaped the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. What is he saying? He's saying you can do it. Sometimes it feels a little overwhelming. Sometimes it might be hard, but you can do it. It'll be okay because I'm going to enable you to do it. I'm going to help you to be holy. I'll enable you to be holy. You can't do it yourself, but don't worry. I'm going to be with you every step of the way. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness mutual affection, and to mutual affection love. Don't just say, okay, I believe, and just let it drop there. You have a job to do, and this is it. You need to show God as holy. You need to honor him as holy. How you do it is how you are with others. So let's really cut this down to a couple of basic points here about honoring God as holy. I always like a little bullet list. I'm like, I get a little overwhelmed after a while. Can't you just give me one thing, two things, So I'm going to do that right now. Keep your faith and trust focused squarely on him. Do not rely on governments. Do not rely on people who think they know what they're talking about because they're smart. Don't rely on anyone for your spiritual well-being than God himself. Take him seriously. Pleasing him should be what drives you every day, from the moment your eyes open until they close. It's the most important thing. It's the only thing. You're willing to stand for him when you're mocked, criticized, or questioned. Now, you notice I didn't say you're willing to get into big arguments with people. I didn't say that. I didn't say go out of your way to be obnoxious, to go out of your way to pick a fight. But what I said was don't back off from the truth either. If it's time to stand up, stand up. Don't be afraid. There are going to be consequences, of course. So what? Didn't bother Jesus. When you're going to face more serious consequences than he did, then you can talk to me. Otherwise, I don't want to hear it. Finally, exhibit Christ-like behavior. The Bible tells us we're to be holy. How do we be holy? We try to look at Jesus' life, and we try to be as much like him as we possibly can. That's your ultimate answer. You want a one-item bullet point, be like Jesus. That's it, baby. That's all we need to know. We need to honor God as holy. Honor God as holy. Drill that into our brains. That's what we need to do. We need to honor God as holy.
Brick after brick, God is building his temple. Brick after brick, he is making it strong. With Christ the sure foundation and